We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. Subscribe and follow on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, where you get videos weekly. And thanks to everybody, got a lot of new additions to the Instagram family. A lot of new followers on Instagram, on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. TikTok. I got a few followers. I laugh with my nephew because my nephew's pretty much the only one who I think watches the videos I put up on TikTok. But hey, if you are among the TikTok followers, thank you. But follow Booked on Rock on TikTok. We are there. You can get a link to the social media sites at bookedonrock.com. Ron Young is our guest to talk about his book, Judge This Book by Its Cover. Man, Ron's story. It's a roller coaster ride through the music business. His personal rise and fall began as the son of an abusive mother, but music would be his savior and hopes for a bright future ahead. As lead vocalist of the band Little Caesar, he shot to rock stardom thanks to being backed by a major record label and working with the biggest producer in music, Bob Rock. But then it all came crashing down. He dealt with bad timing, bad luck, and those who said he just didn't have the right look. Eventually, he found his band crashing as quickly as it rose. That was followed by heroin addiction. He had hit rock bottom. Finally, though, Ron found sobriety and a musical resurrection, and he is here to tell his story. And when I say that Ron tells it like it is, trust me, as you will find out, he tells it like it is. Got a playlist of his band Little Caesar in the show notes page, but first, here is Ron Young. Ron, thanks for being on the podcast, man. How you doing?
Good. It's good to be here.
I enjoyed the book. What a story. Let's start with the early years, where you grew up. What was life like for you as a child?
It was a total shit show, Eric. I had a crazy alcoholic, kind of drug addict mom, and it made for a lot of walking on eggshells in my childhood. And a lot of basically almost like latchkey type situation where I had to kind of fend for myself, starting at a very early age, 8, 9 years old. And just biding my time to get through, school till I get the hell out of the house. And it was kind of crazy. It was a fun neighborhood I grew up with. Had a lot of good, fun friends and a lot of fun activities, growing up in Queens, New York, which is a suburb of Manhattan. And,
a fellow East Coaster.
Yeah. Always till I die, even though I've been in California for many, many decades, I still feel like a displaced East Coaster.
Well, what's interesting is the typical rock star story is you barely get out of high school, forget college, and head straight for rock and roll. But you did go to college, and that's where that's where you got your first gig with a band, right? The Kingpins?
Yeah, I was already doing, I was actually, no, I had already left college because I was living in Melbourne. It was shortly thereafter leaving college that I decided to try to put a band together. And just, college for me was really, I got good grades. I was good in school, had to try to pick some sort of career. My career was really just get away from home, So once I got there was nothing that really intrigued me as being a career or a life path. And going out on the weekends, like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, into the city, so to speak, because I was out on Long Island, I just fell in love with live music, personal, rather than the big concert things like when I was in high school kind of thing, because when you're in high school, you kind of go to stadium shows. But when I started to see bands and clubs, I was just kind of blown away by that intimate connection between the audience and the crowd. And so that's what inspired me to just say, screw it and do it, join a band and get out there and do it. And it just kind of came together quickly. We were playing in all the hot clubs in New York City with a bunch of great bands, and it just kind of took off from there.
Well, I think I hear in Little Caesars music the influences there because you knew your music at a young age. Like you were into Muddy Water, like you were schooled in all this music. You knew R&B.
Luckily, I was schooled in all of the great roots of rock and roll: blues, rhythm and blues, country, rockabilly. Everything that kind of in just the span of a couple of decades gave birth to Led Zeppelin and Bad Company and Skinner and AC/DC and all those bands. And so I went back and did my homework, and I saw the correlation very early on. Really, it was just a matter of volume and distortion that differentiated a lot of the music, but the core of it was really, really similar. So got me on a path of having a reverence toward the roots of rock and roll. And then as I went through and wound up coming out to California and forming Little Caesar, I wanted a real rhythm and blues based, heavier rock band. And at that time, it was all pop metal bands. It wasn't a lot of bands pulling from blues and rhythm and blues influences.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. What led you to LA? And then what was your first impression of the bands on the Sunset Strip scene back in the early to mid 80s you went out there?
Yeah, I moved out in 84 to LA.
Okay.
So what motivated me to leave New York was that really the whole rock scene was dying and hip hop and rap was taking over. Dance music, that was really what was really exploding. It was the birth of, hip hop, LL Cool J,
Run DMC and
Run DMC, and even before that, Grandmaster Flash, Africa Bambaataa, all of the early Curtis Blow, all that stuff. And it just wasn't, I couldn't relate to it, I didn't want to be a rapper. So while I was out on tour with the Kingpins, we came to California, and I saw how vibrant the rock and roll scene was in California. Everything from punk to, heavy metal to pop metal to, roots-based music. There was a big, what they called cowpunk scene going on with like punk and country mixed together. And I just said, this is the place for me. There's pretty much nothing else. Any kind of music I want to make, I can find here with great players. So just picked up and moved out to LA, and there was a real, up on the Sunset Strip was really the explosion of all the what they call hair bands, all the pop metal bands. And then on the east side of Hollywood was all of the more edgier punk rock, sloppier, sleazier kind of bands going on. So, I was trying to have my foot in both worlds, where I wanted to do stuff that was a little bit more hard rock based, but not pop metal based, but keep all the rhythm and blues in it that I was hearing, on the east side of town.
When did Little Caesar come together, and how did that band come together?
We formed in like 87, and by 88 we had, Jimmy Iovine as our manager, and we had all these record labels chasing us. It was really quick. I mean, the band wasn't together 6 months before we had, powerful men in the music business as our manager. And as soon as people heard who was managing us, all the labels started sniffing around. And because we stood out, I remember, it's not even in the book, we did a showcase for Clive Davis.
Oh, wow.
And from Arista. And, he saw the band, and he was incredibly complimentary of me and my singing. And he wanted to sign the band. And Jimmy was like, they're not really a rock label, let's keep looking. And so we passed on Clive Davis, oddly enough, and, wound up signing with Geffen Records, thinking that, well, they've got, at this point, Guns N' Roses is really starting to break. And, they got Aerosmith, and, how can you go wrong? That's a rock label right there. Little did we know there was 260 other bands on the label you never heard of, but you don't find this kind of stuff out till you're kind of knee deep in it.
Yeah, well, that's what I want to ask you about too. Some of the stuff that the average person doesn't know about what it's like to be behind the scenes. There's a quote in the book: "We were a rough-looking band of rock and roll assholes."
Yeah, our T-shirt on the back actually said "the bums of rock and roll."
Yeah.
Our first, yeah. Well, we looked really scummy. People, and the Geffen publicity department was really trying to play us up as being, making Guns N' Roses look like, choir boys, which really wasn't true. We were friends with all those guys,
Well, what's
But-
behind the quote you have too is it was both our saving grace and our tragic downfall.
It was, because unfortunately, the point person that we hooked up with at the label, a guy by the name of John Kalodner. Now, John Kalodner's got the reputation of working with Aerosmith, AC/DC, a million bands. But John is also, when you find out, none of those bands could be in the same room with him. So, John was a very polarizing kind of a figure, was really in love with himself, had a really incredibly large ego. And John had a really narrow, short-sighted vision, and thought that the band, to fit in, should try to produce itself on a more slick sort of an approach, which wound up getting magnified even worse because we started working with Bob Rock as our producer of Metallica fame and engineered the Aerosmith records, and he produced the Cult, and he wasn't known for his producer skills yet. We signed on with him as being an engineer that was moving into production, and we told him we wanted to make a really 70s kind of sounding record. Actually, the kind of records that Soundgarden wound up making, and bands from that were more sort of what was considered Seattle, which was really more of an honest, down-to-earth production stuff. None of these big reverbs and giant drum sounds and all this stuff. So when we were making that kind of really stripped-down 70s record, right in the middle of that, Bob Rock, who had produced Motley Crue, but it didn't come out yet, Dr. Feelgood came out and it went right to number one. And all of a sudden, Bob wanted to make a totally different kind of record than we make. And ultimately, it bit us in the ass because here's this band that they started sonically pushing towards sounding softer, and yet all the visuals we were putting out was really rough. And that kind of it made things more complicated. And then on top of it, as I outlined in the book, there's a whole lot of train wrecks that happened literally in a 6-week period that completely torpedoed our business.
And you spoke your mind. You spoke up.
Oh,
and
it got me into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, it's like, how dare you? You're supposed to sit there and just say, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir.
Yeah, well, I wasn't, because the thing is that everybody in the music, and we had signed the largest recording contract for any new band in the history of the music business.
I saw that in the book, yeah.
Yeah, so everybody behind the scenes at Billboard and Rolling Stone and all the trade magazines, they knew about us and were waiting for this record to come out. Everybody was curious, what's this whole thing about that Jimmy Iovine's managing and John Kalodner is A&Ring and Bob Rock is producing. And when all of their business kind of went in the toilet for Geffen and all the timing for us and our release went to the toilet, I started to get phone calls from all these writers and all these major trade magazines asking what happened. And I told the 100% truth. And David Geffen didn't like that. We became enemies. So on top of us hitting in a 4-week window, we're out on tour with Kiss, which you would think is a great thing. We're selling lots of records. We're getting lots of radio airplay. And all of a sudden, within this 1-month period, David Geffen sells the label. Our records aren't available in the stores. The label manager at the time winds up getting fired for masturbating on his secretary. So there's no one at the helm. You can't find our records in the stores because they're sitting in one company's warehouses yet to be shipped to the new company's warehouses. And David Geffen and Jimmy Iovine have a fight over what was to be a side story. Our manager, who is Jimmy Iovine, decides to start Interscope Records, huge record label, successful label. And at the time, in its early, in its startup idea, David Geffen heard about it and called Jimmy and said, I want to distribute Interscope Records. And Jimmy said, no, I don't like your distribution. First off, you just sold the label and blah, blah, blah. And David got really angry at Jimmy and they became enemies at the time. And David Geffen called us up and said, "You got to fire Jimmy Iovine." I'm like, what do you mean we have to fire Jimmy Iovine? Just because guys are having a fight? Oh, no. According to California law, you can't have a manager that's also a record distributor. It's against California state law. And we're like, what are you talking about? He goes, well, if he now is the owner of Interscope Records, he can't be your manager anymore. So we had to fire Jimmy Iovine. So this is the kind of stuff that in the rough and tumble world of the music business, behind the scenes in corporate rock and roll, this is the kind of shit that goes on. And these people like David Geffen or Jimmy Iovine or whatever, they could not give a shit the outcome from their choices. If it blows up a band's career, so be it. David Geffen was kind of, so what, man? Shit happens. You know, what people don't know is that for most, actually, it's probably still the case, most bands get 6 weeks to either really perform or they move on. They forget all about you, they cut their losses, and they move on. So here we are doing phenomenal 3 weeks out of the box. We're on the charts, both the album as well as the single Chain of Fools. We're in heavy rotation on MTV. Radio Sky, we're on 120 radio stations. We're doing gangbuster business for 3 weeks. Then when this whole chain of events, as I described, went down, everybody just jumped like rats off a sinking ship. Because they know that once you lose all that momentum, once you hit all these kind of problems that can't be smoothed out in that 6 week window, nobody wants the stink of failure on them. So John Collider didn't want the stink on him. David Geffen didn't want the stink on him. And ultimately, I paid the price for that because David wouldn't let us go and reform on another label once the final nail was in the coffin about a year later.
Well, I want to ask you about Chain of Fools, which was a top 20 rock radio single. I think it was a Hot 100 too. We got up in around 88, yeah. I think there. But this wasn't a song. I didn't even realize this until reading the book. This was a song you didn't even want on the album, but turns out to be a hit. How did that song all come about? It's an Aretha Franklin cover, right?
Well, it's an Aretha Franklin cover. When I first put the band together and I picked a whole group of guys to get together and jam, I needed what's called a proof of concept. I was like, let's do a hard rock version of a classic R&B tune, because that's what I want to be. I want to be that kind of band. So we were just like, how about Chain of Fools? And we're like, great, let's do it like Van Halen meets, and we got together and boom, it's in the set. Everybody who knew music was like, wow, that's a real interesting take on that song. And we're like, okay, great. But it was just a cover tune. We just kind of did it. And then, John Collider demanded that it be on the record. We didn't even think it was the strongest song. We had other original songs we thought were stronger. And John's whole thing was, well, Van Halen broke with a cover tune, so can you guys. We're like, well, what does one thing have to do with the other? You're looking well past the production and what it says about the band and none of the. He didn't care, and he made us record it, and then he made it be the first single. So we just had to kind of go with it. And even then it did well. It came out of the box really strong. We were about to, we were talking about, okay, what's the follow-up single going to be? And then we'll come with a ballad. But everything blew up before that ever got to come to fruition.
Eddie hated doing covers. He said, we have our own music. So that was your same thought, right?
That was my take as well, especially when they're saying, oh man, there's like four really, really strong songs, and we don't even know, and they even test marketed a bunch of songs. Chain of Fools wasn't even in the top 3. So it was like, okay, well, why don't we come with another original, couple of rock tracks, and then once we've established ourselves well at AOR Radio, then we'll come out with the ballad. And everyone thought there were 3 hit ballads on the record. One of them was another cover called I Wish It Would Rain by the Temptations. And then there was a song called In Your Arms, which, still to this day is the next biggest stream song on the album.
It's great recording, man. It's great.
Yeah, and that's, again, that's me. That's the kind of band I always wanted to be in, is to have those sort of soulful moments within a set and within the context of the band. And so they were like, man, we've got this deep record with a bunch of tracks on it. So, okay, listen, let's come with Chain of Fools. We'll follow it right up with one of the other rock tracks, and we'll follow it up with In Your Arms. And boom, that's just going to be a solid record. We'll probably get another couple of releases off the record as you get into doing your second record. And we were like, okay, well, guess what? You got to break this band before you're talking about third and fourth singles, but it never came to be.
I've never worked in the business of rock and roll, but I worked in rock and roll radio for many years. So the only way I think I can relate in this is that there were people that I couldn't believe that were working in rock radio that didn't know a goddamn thing about rock and roll.
Oh, I know.
And
it's roots. Yeah.
Right. And it's crazy. So you're a rock and roll band for a label that supports rock and roll bands, but yet there are people in those offices you must have looked at like, do you even know? Do you listen to this music?
Oh, yeah. No, the list of times I tell the story in the book of getting invited into a listening session of a Blue Murder song.
Right. Oh, God, that's a great story.
All of John Kolodner and all the guys from the radio department and the marketing department. And he puts on, I think it was Jelly Roll or whatever. I'm like, and they're all bopping their heads. And I'm just listening. I'm waiting for a really strong hook. They said this was this monster song. And the reason why they said it was a monster song was because of the production. And I'm like, kids don't give a shit about production. A hook is a hook. This is music 101. Is there a memorable hook that you can hum right after the song is over? And if what you're telling me is it's because the snare drum sound is so killer, I'm like, you really think a snare drum sound is what's going to make a hit record? And again, once I said shit like that, I was not invited back to the listening party.
Did you say they were like tapping off beat? They didn't even know.
Oh, they were. They were doing the right thing.
Yeah. Snapping the fingers. Yeah, it's
circle jerking each other. And I'm like, guys, I'm sorry, but I'm just from a musician standpoint, it's a good song. But if you think it's a hit song, like you're all saying, I disagree. Is there anything else on the record?
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. I wanted to ask you about recoupable expenses. So these are some of the terms that people that are in the business. Yeah. What are some of those? These are hard lessons you learned when you got
recoupable expenses are anything that the record label lays out on behalf of you to either make your music or market your music. So that would include the band getting $200 a week. Well, this is not true. You get an advance of which we decided to take $200 a week. But like when John Kolodner gets on a first-class flight and stays at a Four Seasons hotel on my billing cycle, that's a recoupable expense. Every time they send any free CDs, promotional CDs, any messengers, any shipping, any promotional expenses, meaning when the regional radio guy at Geffen would take somebody out like at XYZ radio station in St. Louis to the strip club and to a steak dinner. Guess who's paying that if he talked about Little Caesar? Little Caesar's paying that expense because he forwards it back. They stick it on our recoupable expenses. Dude, I know bands that have sold like LA Guns. LA Guns, they sold like, I don't know, a few million records on their first. They were still in the hole like $1 million to the label. Between also tour support, if you rent a bus, anything, any of that, it's all recoupable expenses. So back in that day, unless you sold 10 million records, you never saw a dime off of record sales. You saw all your money off of the touring, which is still the case. Touring and merchandise, that's where a band really makes its money. Unless it goes like Guns N' Roses or Aerosmith, something that becomes so iconic, that becomes a catalog sort of continuing to pay out. But all of those are, so let's say the recording fund. In our case, our recording budget on the first record, we spent $1.1 million making our first record. Now, that's a ridiculous, unheard of amount of money. But, new band, biggest new band ever signed. The money, all the flights to Vancouver, We were up there for 6 months working with Bob Rock. So all the hotels, all of the food, all of Bob Rock's expenses, all of the studio time, all of that. Rather than bringing Bob Rock down to Los Angeles, he wouldn't come down to LA. So we all went up to Vancouver, $1.1 million. Now, a band typically will make maybe 10 cents on the dollar. So they're making, say, like $1.50 for every CD they sold. Say you sell 1 million CDs at $1.50, you've recouped $1.5 million. So that's $400,000 over your recording fund. But all of those things like those flights, those promotional dinners, those messenger fees, the legal bills, all of that. So none of the bands ever see, they might be all over MTV, all over radio, but according to the record label, the label still is owed money from the band.
That's right. A lot of times it takes 2-3 albums before a band starts making.
Oh, easily. And usually what that means is the band then renegotiates its deal and cuts different, terms than, say, what a new band would do. A higher royalty rate. They get to scrutinize all the expenses. You can't just start writing checks on the band's behalf. Your business manager overlooks them and approves them, anything over, say, $300. This is when the bands start getting some power financially, and they start to exercise a much better situation for themselves.
Tell me about Bob Rock, because that whole situation was crazy, because didn't he leave for a while and then come back?
Well, what happened was we agreed to work with Bob Rock. We were scheduled to go up there. John Kalodner and Bob Rock got into a fight over the Blue Murder record.
Okay. Yeah.
And John said he couldn't work with Bob anymore. So we're like, okay, we need to find a new producer. So in like that 2 or 3 week period before John and Bob kissed and made up again, Bob went and booked the Cult record. So we had to wait over a year for Bob Rock to come in and do our first record, which of course means the band is sitting around LA, spending a lot of money on their recoupable expenses, going further and further in the hole. And then when we finally got together with Bob, it was just kind of a weird situation because Bob knew that we wanted to make that 70s record, and that wasn't going to really happen. He had to protect his brand. He was also working with Bryan Adams on the sly because those two are good friends, and Bryan was caught in that Mutt Lange 3 years to make a record, and Bob was helping him out on the side at his studio up in Vancouver. And Bob he didn't really relate to the New York biker asshole that I was, being the nice Canadian, very, kind of quiet, soft-spoken guy that Bob kind of is. So it's not like we hung out and became friends. It was strictly a business relationship.
And was that when Metallica's album blew? No, it was when Feel Good and...
Yeah, it's Feel Good. That's when, like I said, right in the middle of us tracking all the bed tracks was when Feel Good went to number one.
His attitude changed a little bit.
His attitude totally changed. All of a sudden it was, no, that solo's not slick enough. No, we need to do way more guitar overdubs. No, let's put some keyboards on this. No, let's get these layered backing vocals. No, let's make the drums start sounding bigger and bigger. And we're like, whoa, dude, what happened to just putting up microphones and we're going to record the way Skinner or Bad Company or AC/DC or the Stones, or that's what we talked about. Now we're doing this like LA overproduced, fluffy, you're taking every piece of personality out of the band's performances, out of the band, and making us sound like a corporate rock band. We don't want to be a corporate rock band. We'd rather sink or swim on the band's own inherent musical personality, and you're sanding all of that down to a nice glossy finish.
Yeah, man, you think about Bad Company, like you mentioned, those albums, it's like you're in the room.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. That personal experience. That's what started to turn people. They didn't quite have the listener didn't have quite the understanding of the personalities of the bands. But to be honest, a lot of those bands like Poison and a lot of the bands who were signing off the Sunset Strip were not the accomplished players that Zeppelin and The Who and Skinner and Bad Company were. They were kind of, these guys in their young 20s that, were not proficient players, but the producers made them sound very competent with a lot of cover-ups and a lot of reverbs and a lot of simplifying of parts and a lot of vocal overdubs and a lot of vocal takes. And we wanted to just roll the tape and basically, do 10, 12, 15 takes like they used to do in the old days, and not get the drums and then start punching in every note of the bass line, punching in every note of the guitar part, and every 3 words punch in again on the vocals. And
you said they did that with Vince Neil, right? On the Motley Crue.
He rolled in a 64-track vocal machine, digital machine, and he made Vince sing the song 64 times, and then made Randy Staub, the engineer, with on actual tape, cut like syllables and words together to make one vocal comp, and then bounced it back to the track. Because Bob is a real stickler when it comes to pitch. He's got perfect pitch. So anything slightly out of tune drives Bob crazy. And when you saw the Metallica record, when you worked with Metallica on that documentary, you kind of got a clue to just how perfectionist Bob can be about stuff. When they were doing Dr. Feelgood, there's a lot of stuff with enunciation. Vince isn't the best enunciator, so it's a pitch thing as well as a diction thing. And he drove Vince nuts trying to get every track perfect. Yeah. Where with me, dude, he wound up, I cut 90% of the vocals. Bob wasn't even there. Bob just would come in the morning and he'd listen to like the 8 takes that I would do a Chain of Fools. And he told Randy, just do a comp for me, put it together. And Bob's like, yeah, that's a keeper. Okay, next one.
Take that as a compliment.
I blazed through my vocals. Yeah. I was almost actually kind of bummed out because I wanted to savor it and enjoy it.
Yeah.
And it kind of went by really fast.
There's stories out there now about Don Dokken and Vince and all these reviews and, he sounds terrible. And I've heard comments, 2 sides of this argument. Some will say it's just age and that's it. You can't do anything about it. And then some will say, no, it's just because everybody's been telling them how great they are for so long that they don't bother to try and they don't.
No.
You could get it back.
It's neither of the two, because I have 90% of my voice is still intact.
Okay.
And the reality is that they beat the living crap out of their voice for too many years, and it's had a residual physical effect on the muscle and the structure of their vocal cords. It's not a matter of being lazy. I mean, obviously, if somebody is overweight or out of breath, they can't really sing very well. That's another thing. But quite honestly, it's really nothing they can do about it other than, stick the microphone out on the high parts and make the crowd sing your songs for you, or to just not give a shit. And to be quite honest, I'm shocked when I see some of these videos on YouTube of some of these guys' performances, and they're terrible, and their fans just don't care, man. They just want to go out and feel the vibe and look around the room and hear the music. And God bless these people. They just give these guys a total pass. It's just not right to keep going out there and taking the fans' money when you can't really give them, a solid performance or a consistent solid performance. As a singer, I judge them as like, really, dude? You're calling that singing? And quite honestly, I empathize with them. Man, I wouldn't know what to do if I loved doing something so much and I couldn't do it anymore.
That's the other side of it.
I really do.
Yeah.
I really empathize and but these people that tell me, hey, asshole, blah, 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 you shouldn't call them out. I'm like, no, sorry. These videos on YouTube, video after video, and listen to it, not go, the guy can't sing like he did. If he still had 90% of his vocal range and the vocal quality, the fans would be thinking it's great. I mean, everybody knows people get older. Everybody knows that you can't keep the range as high, and everyone knows you're going to get a little chunkier and a little bit more gray in the hair. It's like, it comes with the territory. But you got to also have your own self-respect to look at yourself and go, man, I love my fans too much. I just can't do it anymore. The way a professional athlete does. Just go away, man. Retire.
Yeah.
Stop taking people's hard-earned money from them and just saying, "Oh, I had an off night," or it's like, come on.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
just-
yeah, I guess so. I guess you're not a fan of tracking, right? That's the big thing
Oh,
too.
well, what's the point of that, dude? It's like that's a sonic dildo. You know, I mean, Jesus Christ! I'm not going to go to a thing and watch guys run around on the stage and lean into a fake microphone with a fake track. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, come on. What is this? Is this? It's supposed to be a concert. It's complete. That is complete and total fraud. You know, it's why Mick Mars left the Motley Crue tour.
That's
He
what I
couldn't
hear.
handle the tracks every night.
That's what I hear.
Everything is on track. Everything's on. Now, it's one thing for these bands that do like just background vocals or an extra keyboard part or an extra guitar part to make things thicker and heavier and more precise. But when the vocals, when the lead vocals are on there and the guitar parts are on there, it's like, come on, man, this is fraud. John Corabi is a great singer.
Oh,
And John joined Motley Crue, and for one record, and there was a lot of people that loved the record.
Yeah.
And John is a killer singer, killer guitar player, and a killer guy. And he caught so much shit for joining that band. And it's not his fault. He was just stepping into an opening, and he took a great opportunity. And to this day, he catches shit for some of the stuff, that went
30
down.
years later.
Yeah, like decades ago.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. I got to hear a good Gene Simmons story because you have a lot of them in the book. Because you
I
toured
got a
with
lot.
Kiss, Winger, and Soul. I actually saw that tour, but you guys weren't there yet because I was in Connecticut, New Haven. It was Winger was there, so it was Kiss, Winger, and Slaughter.
Yeah, no, that was a different leg of the East Coast side of it. We did Nassau Coliseum and the Meadowlands. We did with him, but not up in Connecticut. But we did go up to Rhode Island and Maine and all of those. So it was probably a different leg of the tour. Gene Simmons stories, God, you could tell a million of them. I mean, Gene Simmons is just every day he wakes up. Anybody he crosses in a day, how's it Gene Simmons? But it's like, and there's things about him where he's a warm, funny guy, and then there's times he's a complete fucking prick. It's like one story I didn't tell in the book, and this is a secondhand story, but it comes from a very close friend of mine. Don't tell me bullshit. But a friend of mine was working for a moving company, and that's starving musician. He was moving furniture and such. Well, Gene Simmons had bought a new house, and he actually was one of the movers to move Gene Simmons from one house to a new house. And so at the end of the day, he was like freaking out because, he was Gene Simmons. And well, at the end of the day, he goes up to him and he goes, "Mr. Simmons, I just want to shake your hand I'm just honored that I got to move all your gold records from one house to another." And Gene Simmons back up and he goes, "Gold? Listen, asshole, those are platinum records. And if you say you're a musician, you should know the difference. And if you don't know the difference, then you probably shouldn't be a musician." And he walked away. He was like insulted that he said, gold records.
Yeah.
Those are all platinum. I don't even put the gold records up. He was like insulted by that compliment. So Gene can be like that, But, but there's other times like when you're just talking about music, he's a huge fan of music and he knows a lot about music. And, he's a loving father and a goofball of a husband, but he loves Shannon, and when he lets himself, he can be a really super nice guy.
And one of the greatest entertainers, man. I love Kiss, and Gene was, and he's
it's
still.
interesting that you say entertainer because he gets, I wouldn't say offended, but he corrects you when you call him a musician because I'm not a musician. I'm an entertainer. Musicians, they play music. I put on a show. And he used to come back every night after our show and he would school us and go, you guys are so busy trying to be great musicians, but you're not trying to be entertainers. This is show business, man. You got to fill that stage. When one guy goes to take a solo over there, one of the other guys needs to go to the other side of the stage because that side of the arena needs to feel some energy coming out of it. And it was like we learned so much about it. But he was like, you know what a good show is? Isn't that when you guys play great? It's when you sell a lot of shirts and the pyro goes off on time. That's a good show. And we were like,
Yeah.
okay, you know.
We should add that was what, 90, 91? That was 90.
That was actually 90. That was literally the record was out a week when we jumped onto the festival.
Yeah. I saw him at the old New Haven Coliseum, which isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
So 92, the second album, Influence, came out. Now by this time the label just gave up on the band?
They knew after this whole nightmare on the first record that the second record was just performative. It was just they were obligated to do a second record with us, so they gave us a very small budget. We just went in there and we knocked out a record really quick. They had absolutely zero intention of promoting it. We had a new manager at that point because they made us fire Jimmy. We had a great manager by the name of Herbert.
Yeah, man, that was from Journey fame, which I didn't know.
Carlos Santana and Bad English and all of that. And Herbie came aboard and, you know, the first record was pronounced dead after only one single. And he's like, listen, let's just fall back. Let's just recoup. Now that the warehouse situation's worked out and all of this stuff is worked out, let's go make a great second record. And I think there's light at the end of this tunnel. You're still a great band and a great record speaks for itself and blah, 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 blah. And he's like, I see light at the end of the tunnel. And then he called up and said, okay, I'm coming down to LA. I'm going to have a meeting with everybody, all the, you know, bigwigs at Geffen, and we'll get this back on track. And he calls me after the meeting. He goes, remember when I said the light at the end of the tunnel? I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, it's a freight train. And it's coming at you because they made it really clear that they don't even need to hear the second record. The second record was kind of done. They're done. And, you know, and we were like, okay, great. Well, then, shit, we can go sign with another label now. We're done. They want to drop us. They want us to go away. And unfortunately, that's when, you know, we had a meeting at Geffen and they were like, well, we're going to let you go, but we're also not going to let you reform and go to another label and make this label look bad. If you sell 1 million records, it's going to make our label look bad for not selling 1 million records on the first 2 records. So they exercised what's called a key man clause in the contract, where they let the band go, but they held on to me as an individual for a period of years, and they weren't going to let me go to reform on another label with the same group of guys. And it was really kind of a crushing blow to me. That's kind of when I started doing drugs and shit, because David Geffen made it really clear that he had no intention of doing anything with me or my career. You know, fuck you. You're the asshole that was talking shit about me in Billboard. You know, so he can be very vindictive. And he was so with Don Henley. He was so with Neil Young. You know, he's got that in him. He's got that streak in him.
Yeah, this is when around 92 things get rough for you.
Yeah,
the book
at this
is,
point we're kind of into 93, 94.
Right. The book, by the way, is Judge This Book by Its Cover, Ron Young. It's out now. It's been out. So people can get it all the usual places. But
a couple months.
Yep. Yeah. I remember Artie Lang, the comedian, saying the first time I ever did heroin, he goes, I knew I was fucked because it felt so good. What was your introduction to it? You said you did it a few times in the years past.
I did it a few times over the years. My drug of choice was music and trying to be successful. What I didn't realize was I wasn't in pain those recreational times before. And so though I liked the drug, I knew it was a dangerous drug. And I knew that it was only going to dull me from what it is that I wanted to do. But when you're in a situation where you're in an intense amount of pain emotionally, and you do that drug that all of a sudden makes it feel like everything's going to be okay, that's when it's dangerous. And that's exactly what happened to me. All of a sudden, all my emotional pain went away. You know, everything, all of the having to get over all of this failure and clusterfuckery of corporate rock and roll through a friend of mine who came out to work with me, brought some heroin for New York, and I got loaded, and I'm like, oh, I got to keep doing this every day. I finally feel hey again. And I found a local dealer, and I never stopped calling him for 6 months. And by then, I was totally strung out.
What was the rock bottom moment for you?
When I lost my first wife, where I lived, where I worked, all because I worked with my wife at a company. And she just finally had enough of my shit. I had used her up, and she just wanted to move on. You know, I just become such a wretched, full of self-pity, scamming, shady, disconnected human being that she was just like, I'm done with you. It was 7 years of that, you know? So it doesn't matter how much someone loves you, when you just kind of become self-absorbed, because that's what drug addiction is. It's a self-absorption, a self-obsession. You just make it really difficult for everybody around you to love you. And she took care of herself and got the fuck out of that, pulled the ripcord.
But you needed that, right? You have to hit that rock bottom, right?
Oh,
that's the wake-up call, yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, listen, there's no doubt about it. You know, she saved my life, you know, by walking out on me. Painful, but.
Congratulations, man. So how many years sober have you been?
September was 25 years.
How about that, man?
25 years of sobriety in September.
And what did it take? What got you back?
I had to go to rehab. You know, I was basically destitute. Fortunately, in LA, there's a program called Music Cares and a program called MAP, Musicians Assistance Program. Those two organizations got it so that I could get into rehab. They covered the cost of it. And then when I got out of rehab, got me into like sober living for a while to transition me. And then even gave me a bit of money to get a first apartment. And from there, you know, I got a job and just started to be able to pay my bills and, you know, go to meetings all the time and stay clean and stay with people who were pointing me in the right direction of what to do to get my shit together.
And there was a long period you were living the quote unquote normal life away from music. But then you got back.
No, I took, you know, because of that sort of can't make music on another label thing, you know, from David Geffen, I was like, okay, well, I got to figure out what to do. And fortunately, I love all the technical stuff of music production. You know, I went to music production school, and I'm always the guy that paid attention to how they wire stuff and patching and all the technical wiring of shit. That I was offered a job working at a really nice venue in LA as a monitor engineer. And about 4 months after that, they offered me the job as the production manager at the venue. And for 7 years, I just spent my days keeping that technical side of the business running and catering to musicians, making a good, fun, productive, live environment for bands and up-and-coming bands, young bands too, teaching them just how to communicate in that world to make the most of their music. And it was really a lot of fun. It was rewarding. But then it got to the point where, okay, I miss making music. I miss making music with the guys I made music with. We were always friends, you know. So we got together to start making music. And the next thing you know, we're like, okay, got to make a promise right now. This is not going to be about money. This is going to be about music. And everybody's like, cool. We all got jobs, you know. So it wasn't about, well, how much are we going to make on this? Whatever. Some guys go fishing, some guys go hunting, some guys go camping, we go play music. We started to go over to Europe, where the band had a strong following, number one. Number two, the United States is so spread out, it's very expensive to drive around the US. It takes 3 days just to drive across Texas, you know. In 3 hours, you can go to 2 different countries in Europe. So we booked a tour over there, and it went really well. And then we wound up doing that, the UK, you know, and really kept going over there. That's really where the bread and butter of the band has been, keeping it going for the last 12 years now. But that's why we got to really start doing some shows. Like we just did a run of shows with our buddies in Junkyard last week. So we're going to start doing weekend runs. Hop on a plane, using opening band's equipment to like New York, Boston, or Connecticut, and get out to the Midwest, get out down to the Southeast, because we did really well down there for some of the shows that we did, and just get back out there. And it's just clubs. It's an intimate thing. It's an honest thing. We hump our own gear. We set up our own shit. There's no crew. There's no delusions of grandeur. It's just honest fucking rock and roll. A night of sort of in-your-face music with intimate sort of moments in between the songs, where just telling stories and just being grateful to the people that come out.
For all the right reasons. It's for all the right reasons.
The only right reasons.
Yeah. Hey, what did you think when you heard Nirvana and all those bands? Were you just like, ah, shit? Or did you like it?
Well, I was actually more impressed with Soundgarden, than Nirvana. I actually thought Nirvana was really, there's a part of me that really thought it was cool and honest and emotional. And I thought it was the best thing that could happen to music, because it, within one release, flushed away every, I'm not going to say posers, but bands that relied too much on production and hairspray, as opposed to, okay, here's these guys coming out of Seattle and there's no bullshit about them. You can like them or not like them. I love Soundgarden's first record. Really all their records. I thought Kurt Cobain was incredibly talented as a songwriter and a great group of players. And you could hear that. Now, I don't mean technically. I mean, remember, this is the kind of records I always wanted to make. And so here's a whole scene of bands coming out. Soundgarden's first record sounded like Black Sabbath,
Hell yeah.
And I'm like, see, this is what the fuck I've been talking about.
Yeah, right.
It's like, motherfucker. And I'm like, and it's funny because I remember watching Soundgarden's first video. I'm like, fucking dude's got long curly hair and a goatee and he's wearing a flannel shirt around some ripped up fucking jeans. I'm fucked, because that's what I look like. I was the first guy to wear a fucking goatee,
Man, I know.
And it's like, and guys like Gene Simmons gave me total shit for it. What's with the fucking facial hair, man? What is this, 1974? And I'm like, dude, shut up. Did you try calling him when they released Carnival of Souls and say, well, that's the thing.
I
bumped into him like 6 months later, and I'm like, hey, Gene, nice fucking goatee. Remember? Like, yeah, I know.
That's right. He had to go. He had to go.
Like, yeah, there you go.
Oh, man. Alice in Chains. Alice in Chains you must like, too. Alice in Chains.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Again, it's just, take it or leave it. And I know a lot of people that are into hair metal hated those fucking bands. Hate them with a passion, like rock fans hated disco, Because I get it. It put an end to the Wingers and the Warrants and the Slaughters. And it put an end to it.
Speaking of that, Kip Winger was just saying the other day, during that period, the only gig he could get was at a bookstore in front of 5 people with an acoustic guitar in the mid-90s. That was
overnight.
It. Yeah.
Overnight. They dropped all those bands. I did that project with, basically it was Whitesnake with me fronting it. Adrian Vandenberg, Rudy Sarzo, and Tommy Aldridge. We couldn't get anybody to label to even listen to it, let alone sign it. It was unbelievable. But again, the record industry made the same exact mistakes it made in the 80s and the 90s, where, okay, let's go find 10 bands that sound like Soundgarden, 10 bands that sound like Nirvana, 10 bands that sound like Pearl Jam, which brought you Creed, which brought you Nickelback, which brought you, It's like this whole, it's like, Jesus Christ, didn't you learn anything? And it's funny because I remember having these arguments with John Kalodner going, dude, kids want an alternative to the corporate, fluffy, hot metal shit that you've been cranking out yourself with Aerosmith and such. And even though I think Aerosmith is in a whole other realm than, say, Winger or whatever, but, because of the legacy behind it. But I'm like, kids want an alternative to all this shit, this corporate shit you've been forcing down their throats with MTV, rock track power ballad, rock track power ballad, rock track power ballad.
Yeah.
You know, with the fucking hair and the, you know, all the shit with the wind blowing and the whole fucking frilly clothing. And sure enough, what happened? Alternative. Everything from Nirvana to fucking Blues Traveler to the Chili Peppers. All of a sudden, they're all called alternative. I'm like, what does that even mean? You know?
The
It's
label.
But I felt vindicated that a guy wearing a flannel fucking shirt and ripped up jeans with a goatee who said that music needed to have an alternative and it was coming, that they should be fucking aware and open their consciousness to it. Sure enough, I was vindicated. It wasn't Little Caesar, you know, but it certainly was in concept, proof of concept.
But that gig you got, that production gig, is huge for you, though, because that was your backup plan. A lot of those guys didn't have the backup plan.
Yeah. No,
I mean, it's like,
funny.
you got to play out and dive bars.
The story was, I'm running the Key Club and, you know, I'm just taking care of all the scheduling, all the details, all the load-ins, sound checks. And LA Guns came in, and I was friends with Tracy Guns. We tried to put a band together a couple of times. And he comes in, he's like, you know, bro, gives me a big hug. Are you playing on the bill tonight? I'm like, no, dude, I work here, Key Club. And he gives me another hug. He's like, dude, he's like grabbing me by the shoulder. He goes, you hang in there, man. You're a great singer. Like he had pity for me. And I'm like, Tracy, you're like in this sort of glorified van going to play the Mason Jar after this in Phoenix to like a club. And I'm sleeping in my own bed in the house I fucking bought, dude.
Right.
Do you own a house? Platinum artist? He's like, fuck no, dude. We're like, you know. And I'm like, yeah, exactly right. So don't pity me, because I finally fucking grew up and became an adult.
Yes.
And got a real job and saved up money for a down payment. And I worked my fucking ass off. And I'm not living big, but I'm not trying to chase stardom anymore while I'm in a sort of metal band in the land of grunge, you know, at that time.
Yeah.
And dude, you know, because I mean, bands like that were having a really hard time.
Yeah.
They were just trying to get their head around. We used to play in arenas, and now we're playing in clubs.
Janie Lane, man. Janie Lane.
Not to name any names, but a lot of them still thought that they should get this crazy rider with, you know, bottles of champagne and steaks. And I'm like, dude, you sold 50 advance tickets. I'm not giving you all of this shit that's on your rider. And he's like, well, don't give me this. This isn't, you know, the 80s anymore. I'm like, well, it's not, dude. It's just not. You're playing in a club that holds like 600 people.
Janie Lane of Warrant never got past that, apparently. He just...
I know, man. A lot of
ate him
guys.
up.
And you know what? There's still bands today that I know. They just... It's like they're living in this fucking delusional world of, like, don't you know who I think I used to be kind of shit. And it's like...
Yeah. What do you mean by that quote in the book? You can learn to walk with your limp.
Well, listen, we all have our weaknesses and we all have our frailties. And if you're really honest with yourself, I mean, really, really honest with yourself, and you add up all the input that you're getting in your life as to what your shortcomings are, you can turn that awareness into positives and learn how to work around all those things. You know, it's like a golfer that's got a really bad driver, you know, and it takes him an extra stroke or two to get it on the green, but he's such a good fucking putter. He makes up those strokes on that part of his game. Or a guitar player that can't play like Eddie Van Halen. So we learned how to play with feeling rather than technical prowess. Because I know guys that when they heard Eddie Van Halen, they were like, that's it. I'm handing in my guitar. I'm like, dude, no. You'll never, there's only one Eddie Van Halen. Figure out what makes you unique. And even if it's like, it gives you this, what appears to be a limp, turn that into, you know, personality or a positive, you know.
Judge this book by its cover. It's out now through Journeyman Publishing, available wherever books are sold. How about websites you want to let people know about, social media?
Yes, Amazon.com, you can get it.
Okay, and then you got the website. Little Caesar's got a website.
Yeah, and our Facebook page, please, if you don't think I'm a total asshole after this interview, you can go on Facebook and please follow Little Caesar, listen to our music. There's a lot of people who you really like their music that you've heard of actually are fans of our band. And so check us out. Even if it's 30 years, we're still making music. So check us out, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. This was you made my
Thanks,
day.
guys.
You made my day, week, month, and year.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. It was great talking with you.
That's it. It's in the books.